The film opens as a man named Ian drives the entire way to a remote woodland. After arriving at the entry, he checks his telephone, which has a few 4 calls. Ian considers for some time, yet in the end, he assembles his stuff and heads inside the wilderness by walking. It turns out he's here on a solo hike, perhaps to clear his mind. He slowly makes his way through the thick forest and occasionally stops to gaze at things. We get to know that Ian's not a regular explorer, as he gets dead tired within the initial 10 minutes. Also, he's wearing a sweater and pants, which is a bizarre choice for such an occasion. Ian also brought no protective socks, and now his feet are loaded with painful rashes. Regardless of this, he persists and continues with his journey. After arriving a bit further, Ian spots a hiking couple in the distance. They appear to be taking pictures and having a good time. This surprisingly makes him extremely anxious, and he decides to wait until they're gone. It turns out Ian's a hardcore loner who doesn't like the company of others. When he gets tired of waiting, he takes a detour of the regular path and takes off before they can see him. If they see me, I'll scream, he thinks. Eventually, Ian decides to take a short snack break, but just as he sits down, he is startled by another hiker named Nikki. This person seems very talkative and bombards Ian with a lot of questions. Ian is too nervous to answer any of them, but Nikki is relentless. He keeps babbling about unnecessary stuff and makes cringy jokes. In the end, he suggests that they hike together until they reach the waterfall. Ian desperately tries to be left alone, but Nikki somehow convinces him otherwise. He also makes Ian go first, so he doesn't run off. Along the way, Nikki keeps talking, even though he doesn't get many responses. The only information he knows about Ian is his name and the fact that he used to own a business. After several hours of walking, a tired Ian says he needs to urinate. But instead of letting him do it in a quiet spot, Nikki simply goes to the other side. The two then continue their journey until they finally reach a cabin in the forest. They find the earlier couple, Monica and Austin, in there, who are also heading to the waterfall. That evening, Ian tries to cook some meat in the kitchen. When Nikki shows up, Ian becomes so anxious that he takes the meat out of the oven, even though it's raw. He then tries to leave, but Nikki urges him to cook it properly. Ian complies and returns the meat, but he is so distracted that he ends up burning the oven. Fortunately, Nikki and Monica jump to the rescue and put the fire out. In the aftermath of this incident, an embarrassed Ian grabs his stuff and quietly leaves the cabin. But after wandering a bit further, he spots something in the distance. This scares him shitless, so he quickly turns around and goes back to the cabin. He then has a little chat with Austin, who seems to be more understanding and calm. In the morning, while Ian's eating, Nikki approaches him for a quick chat. Despite what went down the previous night, he doesn't seem to hold a grudge at all. Nikki reveals that he was the one who cleaned all the burnt dishes without any complaints. He then informs Ian that all 4 of them will set out on their hike together. Our anxious protagonist tries once again to be left alone, but Nikki wins his trust by giving him a new pair of hiking socks. The group then departs from the cabin together, making various stories and jokes. The only one who doesn't enjoy the conversation is Ian. When they sit for lunch later, Austin reveals that they saw a dead animal the previous day. It had been ravaged brutally, so he's curious about what predator could do so. Nikki doesn't pay much attention to it, but Ian is left deeply in thought. The conversation then shifts to relationships, and Ian is asked if he has a wife. He tries to dodge the question, but the others press him for an answer. Eventually, Ian reveals that he had a wife, but they're now separated. Tired of the interrogation, he then heads into the woods to pee, but as he's about to do so, he spots scratch marks and blood on the trees. This once again scares the life out of him, so he promptly runs back to his group, probably pissing himself along the way. The 4 then continue their journey and walk for several hours without interruption. At one point, a paranoid Ian feels like someone is following them. When he turns around, he spots something in the distance that freaks him out. He quickly brings the others and asks if they notice it too. However, even after a good look, they can't see anything. By this moment, the group has become aware that Ian is socially awkward and anxious. But they don't want him to feel bad, so they simply assure him that it was some random animal. Nikki even goes as far as saying that it's a goat that has strayed from the city. Hours later, the group arrives at another camp. This time, They find 2 other backpacks inside, but no people around. Ian, as usual, becomes worried about their whereabouts, but the others don't regard it and start jamming with the guitar. Nicky is just the kind of guy to break out Wonderwall. Later that night, Ian has trouble sleeping due to his anxiety. As he wanders around, Nicky approaches him for a talk. He asks if Ian is okay, as he's been acting very strange throughout the trip. He urges him to open up, and Ian finally reveals that he has been feeling very low due to some personal issues. Nicky feels bad for him, so he gives him a sleeping pill, which Ian consumes immediately. After Nicky leaves, Ian starts wandering around the room. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he continues to inspect one of the abandoned backpacks. He finds a camera inside it, which he turns on without hesitation. He then discovers 2 girls who are hiking through the forest and having a good time. But in one of the pictures, Ian sees a man creeping up on them from a distance. When he zooms in, he's shocked to find that the man is none other than Nicky. Ian tries to find out more, but he starts getting dizzy all of a sudden. This is when he realizes that Nicky gave him a drug instead of a sleeping pill. He tries to call for help, but soon passes out and drops to the floor. When Ian wakes up in the morning, he finds himself resting peacefully. It turns out Nicky covered him with a blanket so he wouldn't fall sick. But Ian is still suspicious of the talkative fellow and continues to expose him. He brings out the camera and announces that Nicky was stalking the 2 girls. Austin and Monica ask to see the picture, but the camera's battery seems to have run out. Despite this, Ian accuses Nicky of luring the girls to a quiet spot and killing them. He also claims that he was drugged the previous night as he was getting close to finding out the truth. After hearing all of this, Nicky doesn't try to defend himself. He's stunned that such accusations are being made against him. Even the other 2 are confused by what Ian is trying to say. All of a sudden, the 2 hiker girls show up at the cabin, leaving Ian completely embarrassed and repentant. The next part was probably just foreplay with the 2 girls. I told you this guy. I mean, plays Wonderwall. I mean, same thing. Once more, in the following scene, he approaches Nicky and apologizes for his behavior. He explains that he's become paranoid due to the lack of sleep and proper rest. Surprisingly, Nicky forgives him and acts as though nothing happened. Austin and Monica are also cool with the situation, as they feel genuinely bad for Ian. They try to help him in any way they can. Later, they pack their belongings and continue their journey. They soon arrive at a junction, one way leading to the waterfall and the other to Cowrie Forest. Monica and Austin then announce that they want to head towards the forest, as they've heard it's even more beautiful. So, the 2 groups part ways and head down separate paths. The boys walk for several more hours, and it starts getting dark. At one point, Ian again spots something in the distance that scares him. But his fear soon vanishes when they are greeted by the beautiful waterfall. The 2 take a moment to cheer at the glorious sight before continuing on their journey. Sooner or later, it gets completely dark, and they have to make their way through a narrow road. Ian suggests that they take another route, but Nicky insists that they don't have another choice. He then hands the frightened Ian his expensive flashlight and asks him to lead the way. Ian hesitantly moves forward and navigates through the dark spot. But he soon loses his balance and slips, causing the flashlight to tumble down the slope. This annoys Nicky, and he orders Ian to get down there and retrieve it. He also makes it clear that he spent $300 on it. Blame me for murder if you want, but get that flashlight, he says. Ian reluctantly agrees and slides down the slope to get the flashlight, but then he sees a dark figure standing right next to him. Panicked, he turns away while shouting as loud as he can. Monica and Austin, who happen to be nearby, hear his cries and rush to him. Nicky also arrives there, and they peer down to find what was chasing Ian. However, they see nothing. After arriving at the nearest lodge, Nicky, Austin, and Monica have a serious discussion. They are worried for Ian and want to get him out of this wilderness pronto. Since the couple are on their honeymoon, Nicky generously offers to accompany Ian out. He is still willing to help the anxious, peculiar stranger despite all that has happened. The trio then approaches Ian and informs him of their decision. Surprisingly, he has no problem with it. The very next morning, Ian and Nicky set out on their journey towards the city. They walk for a long time until Nicky needs to relieve himself, so he goes to a corner. Ian then takes this moment of solitude to ponder everything that has been going on. But while he's lost in his thoughts, he realizes that Nicky has still not returned. He calls out for him but gets no response. Ian slowly moves in the direction where his friend had gone some time back. But he soon comes across an awful sight which shocks him to the core. In the next scene, Ian races to the couple and informs them that something killed Nicky. He is so terrified and panicked that he fails to explain the entire situation. Because of this, the couple believes that Ian's the one who killed Nicky, so they ask him to stay away from them. Austin even pulls out his knife and threatens him to go away. Eventually, when the couple reaches a bit further, they decide to click some pictures. But suddenly, Monica is pulled inside by an unseen force. This sends Austin into a state of panic, and he rushes to find her. However, all he comes across are her ruined remains lying in the forest. Ian is also there, prompting Austin to think that he's the killer. He tries to attack him, but his leg gets stuck in a bear trap. This is when a large bird-like dinosaur appears in the distance and drags Monica's body away. The boys are left in complete shock by what they just saw. Realizing that it's not safe here, Ian quickly frees Austin from the trap and escorts him to the lodge. They then lock all the doors and prepare for the beast to arrive. True to their assumption, the dinosaur bird shows up and gets in. It swiftly slashes Austin in the face with its sword-like mouth and kills him. The bird then pursues Ian, but our strange hero appears to be a good fighter. He grabs its neck and tosses it to the ground. He then chokes the bird vigorously until it finally stops breathing. When the sun rises the next morning, a bruised and battered Ian makes his way through the woods. As he's about to reach the parking lot where his car is, he sees one of the hiker girl's dead bodies hanging on a tree. Then, after wandering a bit further, he comes across a bunch of dinosaur eggs, indicating that there are more creatures. A frightened Ian then tries to get away, but is suddenly attacked by a large male. It claws his legs and wounds his thigh. Luckily, he manages to escape by taking off his pants. Ian then continues to run until he reaches the road. The film ends as he stops a car and desperately says, "Help me,